I'm here with Yamaha's Jeff Turner to talk about some of the features on the new 2021 MT-09. Amongst many kind of new features that's on this bike, it's now got a much more complex suite of electronics, hasn't it? Which I think we were saying has been developed from the R1. Not quite as many parameters, perhaps, functions, because it's a different kind of customer, but it's essentially the same system that's driving it. Is that right?
Yeah, it measures in the same way and it calculates in the same way, but it offers the rider a more limited selection of functions because obviously you don't need quite as many track functions and so forth as you do on a super sport bike.
Yeah.
But essentially the way it works is very, very similar, and it's derived originally from Motor Grand Prix.
Okay, yeah, and it's all based around what's called a 6-axis IMU, which sounds complex if you've not come across it before. It's actually quite straightforward and quite simple.
Yeah, it's pretty high tech, but it's simple in terms of understanding it. So it effectively uses sensors mounted in 3 different angles to detect the axis that the bike's moving around. So that's acceleration, deceleration, bank angle either side, and what we call pitch and yaw. So a bit like on an aeroplane when the tail goes sideways or something, that's pitch and yaw. So the idea is that the brain of the IMU is actually feeling the same as the rider does. So the bike knows what's going on in the same way that a rider can feel and know what's going on. And it does that. The sensors are a bit like the sensor in your mobile phone. When you turn it from holding it upright to sideways, the image switches over. So it knows what the bike is doing. And by adding the 3 different axes at different angles, it gives you a complete 360 picture of how the bike's moving.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So yeah, so this IMU controls ABS, controls traction control. So ABS, traction control, and then it controls slide control, which you may need to kind of explain that a bit. And then there's lift control, which isn't the same as anti-wheelie. So let's start with slide control.
Okay,
exactly?
so slide control is that bit that you actually feel in your backside, shall we say, when the bike is moving sideways, and this is measuring the acceleration sideways within parameters that are set, and it's deciding that when it's moving too quickly sideways, actually we'll have some intervention because your slide could be not recoverable.
Yeah.
So it's effectively limiting the amount it lets the bike slide by altering the engine very subtly. So you can't feel it going on, you just know that when it's set, the bike isn't going to suddenly spit sideways, even if it's wheel spinning. So you can have the traction low and allow the bike to wheel spin, but not go sideways.
Yeah, that's interesting. And then there's the lift control, which is not anti-wheelie, but has an impact on how quickly the bike wheelies.
Yeah, so the lift control is almost exactly the same as on the R1 and the R1M. So it's actually measuring the rate of wheelie. So it doesn't stop you wheeling, it just makes the front wheel come up faster or slower, depending on how you like it. And the idea there being that you give the rider more control, because obviously when you limit wheelie, you limit power, but that's not necessarily what the rider wants. So as a rider, you would have a number of options. You could roll the throttle if it was coming up too quickly. You could lean forwards, as a lot of people do when the wheelie's coming up, or you can just enjoy the wheelie. So it's not going to stop it wheeling, but on number 1, and remember the lower the number, the least intervention, number 1, it will come up at a reasonably quick pace. Number 2, more slowly, and number 3, even more slowly on the anti-wheelie. And in reality, what that means is that number 1, you're enjoying some wheelies if you want, under the right circumstances. But number 3, where the intervention is at maximum, actually the wheel's coming up so slowly that you've probably selected the next gear before it comes up into a wheelie. So effectively it will feel like it's stopping at wheelie, but it isn't actually. It's just giving you a lot of control through electronics.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I guess and the other thing then when we talk about the functions, a lot of us are more familiar with, so ABS and traction control, having that 6-axis IMU then gives you, I think on this, you've got a choice, haven't you? You can either have a very standard simple ABS system, or you can have lean angle sensitive ABS. And presumably the traction control also, is it that lean angle sensitive as well?
Yeah, traction control is the one thing that's slightly different, because traction control is measuring wheel spin. So you have sensors in both wheels, and that calculates whether the rear wheel is moving faster than it should in comparison to the front wheel, and also obviously looking at your speed and revs. So it knows that it knows that the wheel is breaking traction because the wheel is turning too fast for the conditions that the other sensors are delivering the information to the ECU and the IMU. So it knows the wheel spin, and that's less linked into the IMU. Okay. So the ABS, as you say, you have a choice. You can have standard ABS, or you can have ABS linked to the IMU, which then is sensing your bank angle and everything else. So that's useful to have, especially when grip levels are lower. Yeah.
And the standard ABS is something that you probably more like to leave on if you're on track.
Absolutely, yes. So the standard ABS is working in a way to the reverse of traction control, if you like. So it's measuring wheel speed and acceleration, deceleration, and it's working out the parameter actually the wheel may lock at this point. So it's adding ABS. Because unlike a car, a motorcycle ABS, you don't want it to lock the wheel. You want it to take it to a point almost to locking before it releases some of the brake pressure. Whereas in a car with 4 wheels, it's actually not a problem to have a wheel lock before you unlock it.
Yeah, sounds absolutely fascinating. When you look at it first, when you look at the controls actually look very simple on it, because it's a thumb wheel on the right hand handlebar, and it's a rocker switch and a mode button on the left hand. Those few switches have to control an awful lot of things. So do you want to go through it and show us how it all works?
Yeah, of course. Let's go through and look at the functions now. Yeah, so we'll start off with the right wheel scroll. So this allows you to select between the main important functions on the menu. So this is in standard. As soon as I touch it, you'll see the 2 white lines disappear, and the little cursor there selects odometer. If I scroll it again, then it moves on to the fuel. So these are multi-function displays. So put it back to odometer, a quick click, and that takes you into the various different trip menus. So here we have trip time. So Steve took you 19 minutes and 8 seconds to get here. We've got 686 miles on it. The last trip was 203, and so forth. 2 trips, a fuel average, a miles per gallon, air temperature, coolant temperature, and then you've got your fuel gauge. So you select the one you want. In this particular case, we'll go for the odometer. Quick press, that selects that. Then we'll go down to the fuel gauge. Fuel gauge obviously is very useful, but for example, we might be on a track, so we might want to go and press that and look at our trip time or our fuel consumption and so forth. Depends on what journey you're doing. So you can personalize this display really to have it how you want. If you want your fuel at the top and you want your odometer at the bottom, you can do it like that. So that allows you to scroll through those functions. Then with another trip down, we go into the menu settings. Press on the scroll wheel, takes you into the menu, and here you have the main options of the bike. So starting at the top, we have a display setting. A quick click on the scroll wheel allows you to turn your lap timer on and off. So obviously if you're out on a circuit or you want to use your lap timer, and this is quite simply a stopwatch where the headlamp flash now becomes the on-off for the stopwatch. So as you cross the finish line, you just press the headlamp flash, and that will give you your lap time, and it'll also count laps. And we have the tacho color. So if you like your tachometer to display to change color as you rev up, that allows you to turn that function on and off. So important that you remember to get out of this function, you scroll down to the little triangle at the bottom, and you press that to move across the menu, because what that also does is an auto save function. So one of the benefits of the way MT-09 is set up, and all Yamahas in fact, is that other than the traction control, which will always reset to 1, all of the functions are remembered when you turn the bike off, and when you turn them back on, they are as you leave them. So we'll press the little triangle, we'll scroll back up to the menu, and we'll go into the manual settings. So if you remember from the main function, you have 3 programmable settings for your main rider aid functions: traction control, slide control and lift control. The manual setting is personable, so you can change it. So we select that with a click, and you can see here this is the manual setting. So Steve, how do you like your traction control on a day like today?
I like it so it doesn't interfere. I like it so it only comes on when I really need it.
Okay, so in a Yamaha system, the smaller the number, the less interference you get. So traction control set at 1, that's fine. Now slide control, this is when the bike actually allows it to go sideways, allows it to move laterally, to yaw if you like, and a lot of riders don't like too much slide because it makes them feel uncomfortable. So perhaps we limit that a bit for you, Steve?
Yeah.
So I click into it, that gives us a selection of having 1, 2, 3, or if we go the other way, off. So for you, we'll add a bit of slide. Sorry, and we select again, press 2, press again, select 2 for the slide. Now Steve, you like a wheelie or two, don't you? So I'll tell you what, just for today, for the lift control, select that, let's turn the lift control off. So you're going to feel a little bit more excitement in your ride with the front wheel coming up, but knowing that the back end is under control because the electronics are going to limit the traction wheel spin, and they're also going to limit the slide. So this is a fun setting. If you were riding, for example, in the winter, you might go with a much more conservative setting for your manual. So in the winter, you might be thinking about wet, cold roads. Here we are in the spring. Let's make it lively. In the winter, you might be setting 3 on the traction, 3 on the slide, and 3 on the lift. So it allows you to personalize it and have a little default menu of your choice. So again, press the triangle. That means it's saved and stored, and there's the personal Steve setting for his journey home.
Perfect. Thank you.
So the next one is the vehicle setting. So we'll go in here. This is BC and QS. So BC is brake control setting. If we select that, you've effectively got 2 options. Number 1, brake control. Click into there. And then number 2, brake control. So the difference here is very simple. Number 1 is a straightforward anti-lock braking, so a straightforward ABS, which is done by monitoring the wheel speed. If we select number 2, this is braking control, so it's ABS plus bank sensitive ABS. So this will change your ABS rating depending on how leant over you are, which also therefore affects the grip of the tyre and so forth. For very sporty riding, we recommend 1 because you get a very good feel. As soon as the conditions deteriorate, we'd recommend 2. So on a good day like today, I think for you, Steve, we'll leave it in 1. Let's go back to the next setting. Next is quick shift system, and quite simply, you can either turn this off or you can leave it on. And this is quick shift up and quick shift down. They have different functionalities, and you can turn one off. But honestly, again, on a nice day like today, we'll leave the quick shifter on for you because it works very well on this bike. So we'll come out of the vehicle settings, another click on the little triangle at the bottom saves that, and we move into shift indicator. So shift indicator is an interesting one. So this effectively uses the gear number on your main instruments to act as a quick shift setting. So it allows you to set the point where you like to change gear. And you can move that around. So, for example, if you were running in, you might set this at 5,000 or 6,000. On a day like today, actually the obvious place to set it is at peak power, which is at about 10,000 RPM on the tracer. So we've got 3 functions here. One is on or off, and the next is where we would like the quick shift indicator to flash at you. So I would suggest here we'll increase this up to 10,000. And that means that shift indicator will flash at you when you're at peak power. And that's not to say maximum revs, because maximum revs here is 10,600. Yeah. So when would you like to stop it flashing at you? Well, probably 11,000 is quite good. That gives you 1,000 revs to play around with. And you'll notice on the way back, when you hit 10,000, that shift, that gear indicator will start flashing as your shift indicator. Okay, so leave that as it is, click the triangle and save it. We'll down to the next one is maintenance. So this gives you essentially a trip meter, which is linked to when you last did an oil change or your service intervals. So that's a gentle reminder. So we'll leave that as is for you. The next one is units. I'm assuming you're a traditional guy like me and you like your miles and your gallons and your centigrades or your Fahrenheit. So you can select how you want to set the bike up and how you want the units to read. Then we have a brightness function where you can trim the bike in terms of the screen display. Bright summer's day like this, we'll have it full bright, but on a dull winter's night or so forth, you might like to dull that down. And then finally we have a clock, which allows you to adjust the settings of the clock. And we have an all reset, which puts it back to standard. So essentially what we've done here is we've taken the third of your personalizable maps, and we've added all the other settings you want, and we've given you a bike that should be a little bit more fine-tuned to the current conditions and your riding style. So we'll hit exit and we'll go back to the main screen. So that's the main scroll wheel function on the right. On the left you have a system which is, should we say, a quick select. So this has a couple of different functions. The first is the mode button in the middle. When you press the mode, you'll see that it toggles from the D mode, which is essentially your maps, to the traction control mode. So we'll hit mode and you can see that those two swap over in the screen. D mode is now the larger number and is what you're actively changing. If we swatch it back, it's traction control. So in mode 1, you have a traction control setting of 1, and as you probably saw from the pre-loaded map, everything is set at 1. So traction, slide and lift all at 1. We can toggle that about by using the little grey rocker switch, and we can go into D mode 4, D mode 3, D mode 2 and back into D mode 1. If we change across in D mode 1, we can now select manual, which is the map we've just set up for you, and that now gives you, if you remember, 1 on the traction, 3 on the slide and no wheelie control added. So that's your lively one for the way home. So you can play around with this and you can personalize it on the fly. All you have to do is use this left hand quick menu selector, close the throttle, and as soon as it's off throttle you can change it about. So that allows you to move through the pre-programmed maps and your own personal one. So let's leave it on M for your journey home.
Brilliant, thank you for that. It's actually really straightforward.
Not super difficult, but there's quite a lot of functionality. The system is very similar to the R1M and the R1, but with a little bit less functionality because the choices available to the rider, we think on this bike are perhaps not as extensive as personalising your Supersport bike.
Yeah, and it's interesting you can do it on the move. It looks, the first time you see it, it looks very complicated, and you think I'd never be able to do that on the move. But I guess when you know it really well, and there's certain simple things that you just want to do, it's actually not that difficult, is it? You just go in the right menu, make a simple adjustment.
Yeah, I think probably the most useful thing is, so for example in the winter, you might get it raining or changing conditions, and if you have a rain mode set as your personal M mode, then obviously it's very easy. You're out for a ride, starts to rain, you just close the throttle, hit a couple of buttons, and you're into the mode that you've set up with lots of traction, lots of slide. It doesn't interfere, it's not a harsh system, it's very natural, very intuitive, and it's just providing that little safety net of electronics, just to make sure that everything's good for how you're riding in the current conditions.
But also presumably it means that you can, like I say, you can set up your own rain mode. So if you want a rain mode that's still got a reasonably sharp throttle but has got a lot of electronic assistance.
Yes, so that is obviously the idea, is so that you can personalise it to what suits you. So if you like it's set up sharp, then yes, that's exactly what you will put into your manual mode. And just the final thing here, we haven't got heated grips, but if you were to fit the optional heated grips, they do plug into the system as well. So then the scroll wheel becomes a simple 10 setting adjuster for your heated grips, and you can set that up as the priority for the scroll wheel so that you can just adjust your heated grip level as you go along.